Chapter 6. Something to Land. A woman in a blue bathrobe was sitting on a crumbling stone wall. She was sobbing into her handkerchief. Two boys with dark hair sat next to the woman. The boys wore dusty, torn pajamas. They were both barefoot. The younger one was watching the older boy write on a rectangular piece of wood with a chunk of coal. Annie pulled Jack over to the family. "Hi, I'm Annie," she said. The two boys looked up. "I'm Peter," said the youngest. "He's my brother Andrew, and she's our Aunt Mary." He pointed to his brother, then to the woman as he spoke. Aunt Mary tried to smile through her tears. "Forgive me," she said. "I'm a bit shaken up." "We are too," said Annie sympathetically. "The house caught fire," Peter said. "We escaped," said Andrew. "But we lost most of our things." "We've lost our shoes," said Peter. Jack and Annie looked at the boys' bare feet. They were cut and bleeding. "Hey, my boots are just like a boy's boots," Annie said. "One of you can wear them." "Take mine too," said Jack. He and Annie started unlacing their boots. "We can't just take your boots," said Andrew. "Then we'll lend them to you," said Jack. He and Annie handed their boots to the two boys. Thank you," said Aunt Mary. She started crying again. The two boys put their new boots on. Then Peter whispered something to Andrew. Andrew held out the piece of wood to Jack and Annie. "Here's something we can lend you," he said. Jack and Annie read a poem the brothers had written on the piece of wood. "There is no water and still less soap. We have no city, but lots of hope." "Thanks," said Annie. "It's a great gift," said Jack. "We needed some hope." "It's the only thing we can lend you," said Andrew. "Lend?" said Annie. She looked at Jack. "Oh, wow, they just gave us the special writing, something to lend." Jack smiled. They could go home now. "You should go to Golden Gate Park. That's what a reporter told us," he said to the boys and their aunt. "Is that where you're going?" asked Aunt Mary. She had stopped crying at last and looked stronger. "We have to go home to our parents," said Annie. "Will you be safe?" asked the aunt. "Yes, once you're home, we'll be safe," said Jack. "Thanks for lending us your boots," said Peter. "You're good friends," said Annie. "You've helped us more than you know," said Jack. "Be careful," said Aunt Mary. "We will," said Jack and Annie. They waved as their new friends headed off to the park. Jack sighed. "Ready?" he said. "Yeah," said Annie. "I guess we just go back the way we came." Jack looked down the street. Smoke billowed up from the bottom of the hill. "That might not be as easy as it sounds," he said. Chapter 7. Dynamite. "We'd better be careful," said Annie. They stepped in their sock feet over the broken cobblestones, trying not to cut themselves. They headed down the hillside. On their way, they passed policemen carrying stretchers with injured people on them. They passed two soldiers directing all those trying to escape the fires. One man was trying to push a piano down the street. Another man was wearing a bunch of hats, all piled on top of another. A woman carried her 3 little dogs in a bag. "Everyone's trying to save what's important to them," said Annie. "Like the librarian," said Jack. "And us, we are trying to save this sign." He clutched the piece of wood. When they were halfway down the hill, a soldier on a horse galloped in front of them. "Get up the street. We are setting up dynamite," he shouted. "Dynamite," said Jack. "Yikes," said Annie. People started running in all directions. Jack and Annie looked around widely for a safe place to go. Jack saw. They ran into the alley and crouched on the ground. Jack reached into his bag for their research book. He looked in the index for the word dynamite. He found it. Then he turned to the right page number and read. After the fire started, the mayor had an idea. He thought that if some buildings were destroyed, the sparks would not fly from one wooden roof to the next. He ordered some buildings to be blown up by dynamite. His plan didn't work. The firestorm raged from building to building, from street to street. Firestorm, Jack thought. The word sounded terrible. Just as he put the book away, a huge blast of dynamite shook the ground. Dust and dirt flew everywhere, even down the alley. Jack crouched their sign with one hand. He covered his eyes with the other. Annie did the same. Another huge blast rocked the ground. Jack tasted grit in his mouth. He looked at Annie. She was caked with dust from head to toe. He looked down at himself. He was just as dirty as she was. Hey, would you look at those two? Someone said. Now that's the story. Jack looked up. Betty, the newspaper reporter, and Fred, the photographer, were standing in front of them. Even though they were also covered with dirt, Fred was setting up his camera, and Betty was taking notes in her notebook. Hold up your sign, Sonny, said Betty. Too stunned to say anything, Jack held up the sign with the poem about hope. Fred took a picture. Another dynamite blast shook the ground. Come with us. We are headed for the park, said Betty. We can't. We are on our way home to our parents, said Annie. Well, get going and be careful, said Betty. Let's beat it, Fred. The photographer grabbed his camera equipment, and the two of them rushed off. I don't think Betty and Fred recognized us, said Annie. I don't recognize us, said Jack. Another blast shook the ground. Come on, said Annie. Let's beat it. Jack and Annie jumped up. Jack put their sign in his bag. Then they started back down the hill.